Ministers, Excellencies, thank you so much for the honour of addressing you this morning. My name's Brad Page. I am the CEO of the Global CCS Institute. For those that don't know, the Institute is a member-owned international think tank, and we have 105 members, including governments, multinational energy companies, technology providers, research organisations and NGOs. We are very proud to count among our member governments the Australian government, which is the founding government of the Institute, as well as the Japanese government, one of our most important members. I should also note that the Chinese government is also a member of the Institute. We have a very simple mission. It's to accelerate the deployment of CCS globally. And to do that, we have global operations with offices and staff based in Melbourne, Australia, our headquarters, in Washington, DC, Houston, London, Brussels, Tokyo, Beijing, and as of last month, Abu Dhabi. The context, I think, is important, and it's reflective of many of the things that have been said so far already. It's only about climate change. The Paris Agreement, as everybody knows, is aiming for 2 degrees C and preferably 1.5, but our current trajectory is greater than 3 degrees C. And the Paris Agreement provides for net zero emissions in the second half of this century. This issue comes down to the maths, and from an economist's perspective, this is a classic stock problem. Generally speaking, the 2 degrees C pathway requires an 85% reduction in emissions by mid-century. For 1.5 degrees C, this is a 100% emission reduction by mid-century. But to then get to net zero is going to be required for both a further carbon dioxide removal effort of somewhere between 5 and 10 gigatons per annum. And this is an enormous task that lies in front of us with few options. The IPCC, in its special report on 1.5, laid out 4 potential pathways to achieve 1.5. I want to particularly focus on P2, P3, and P4 here. As you can see where I'm highlighting, this blue shaded area represents CO2 emission reductions that will need to come from carbon capture and storage. Importantly, in all of these pathways, there are very substantial carbon dioxide removal efforts required, represented by this magenta color. And in all of these, they too require carbon capture and storage. In these models, from bioenergy, but in the future, quite likely from direct air capture as well. It is clear from the IPCC's work that 3 of the 4 pathways require very substantial amounts of carbon capture and storage. And it's worth observing that the first pathway is generally regarded as highly unlikely to be adopted as a sensible pathway. So this brings us to our uncomfortable reality. Existing capital stocks will overwhelm a 1.5 or 2 degrees C carbon budget. My good friend Dr. Birol has just reflected on some of the IEA's findings, but if we go back to a report of theirs in 2018, they assumed the normal capital life and observed that existing global energy capital stocks consume 95% of the CO2 budget available under their 2 degrees C sustainable development scenario. Their 1.5 degree budget wasn't possible without somewhere between 100 and 1,000 gigatons of CO2 removal by 2100. But as we all know, new and emissive energy facilities continue to be built. And while the estimates vary, generally speaking, it's accepted that coal-fired power plants in Asia have an average age of around 14 years. It's worth reflecting again that the engineering life of these power plants will be somewhere between 35 and 50 years. So this leaves you with a simple conclusion. Achieving climate goals is going to require, among many, many other things, of course, the premature retirement of existing facilities at an enormous scale, or many, many gigatons of annual abatement using carbon capture and storage. But really, most likely, it's going to require both of these things. And that leads you to a very simple conclusion. CCS is vital to net zero. It's a game-changing technology. Zero-emission electricity is undoubtedly a huge part of the solution to this puzzle, but it is not the whole answer. Hard to decarbonise sectors in particular need CCS. Steel, chemicals, cement, fertiliser and plastics are very, very strong examples of where CCS will provide the solution to decarbonisation. We cannot ignore the new opportunities in the new fuels and especially hydrogen production. And here again, CCS plays a big role. We've also seen that the net zero commitment is rapidly increasing, both from governments and importantly from many large corporations globally. This means carbon dioxide removal in very large quantities will be required, and undoubtedly a very substantial proportion of that will come from bioenergy with CCS as well as direct air capture with storage. And unsurprisingly, as a result of all of that, CCS is rapidly coming to the fore. So with that as the background, I'd like to just tell you where we're up to now with CCS globally. So annually, the Institute publishes the global status of CCS. We do it towards the end of the year, usually aligned with the COP meeting. The figures that I have here are as current as we can make them today. We're currently in the process of putting together all of the data and updating our databases for the production of the 2021 status report, which should be released sometime in October. Today, there are 66 commercial CCS facilities at various stages of development and operation. 26 are operating right now, with a further 4 under construction. Another 34 are in various stages of planning, and currently 2 facilities have their operations suspended. One due to a fire in its host plant, and the other due to the oil price not supporting EOR operations and therefore the cost of the CCS facility. What was impressive in 2020 was that we saw 17 new commercial facilities at various stages of planning and construction come into the database at the Institute. That's almost the greatest number we've ever seen in a single year. The 26 operating commercial facilities capture and store around 40 megatons per annum of CO2. And if all 66 facilities were in operation, there would be a total capture capacity of around 115 megatons per annum. And I think this graph really tells the story of the uptick in CCS interest. We've seen since 2017 sustained and sustainable ongoing growth in the CCS facilities pipeline. It's interesting how between 2010 to 2020, the capture capacity of those facilities in operation has almost trebled. And just in the 1 year between 2019 and 2020, there was a 33% growth in the total size of the pipeline. I can already tell you that that trend is continuing again in 2021, and I would expect that that will be the case for years to come. In terms of where CCS is being applied and where it's occurring, this chart is very detailed, and I just really want to point to some highlights. The red vertical line represents where we are today in 2021. To the left of that line are all of the facilities in operation, with 2 purple dots there representing those that are currently suspended. To the right are all of the facilities either under construction or at advanced stages of development. What I really want to point to here is the incredible flexibility and breadth of application that comes with CCS, starting at the top with cement production, iron and steel, waste to energy, right through to at the bottom, natural gas processing. We've seen in the past that natural gas processing has dominated the CCS project database. This is to be expected. This is where much of this technology came from. But what we're now seeing is the rapid expansion across a whole range of applications, especially into these difficult to decarbonise sectors. And importantly, a clustering of new projects in both natural gas and coal-fired power generation, driven in the United States largely on the back of tax credit policy. The other important development over the course of the last 4 or 5 years has been a change in the business case arrangement for CCS. We know that most heavy emitting industries and companies are perfectly capable of managing carbon dioxide capture processes. It's a different matter to transport the captured CO2 and to store it. That tends to require quite different skills and a different business. What has come about then is the development of CCS hubs and clusters, characterized by heavy emitting industries clustered geographically together from history, that together can access common user infrastructure for transportation and storage, which in and of itself is its own business. This has grown so quickly that there's now 15 of these hubs and clusters that we identify at various stages of development around the world. Predominantly in North America, certainly with number one there, the Alberta Carbon Trunk Line now in operation, and others coming along quickly behind. This is a very important development and something that we're seeing spreading throughout the world to enable CCS. I also just want to point to the significance of the cement, iron and steel and chemical sectors in terms of the abatement opportunity for CCS, and what the IEA is expecting will actually be the role for CCS here. And you can see that between 2017 and 2060, the IEA sees almost 30 gigatons of CO2 being captured and stored using CCS from these industries alone. That is a very substantial volume of CO2 when you reflect that at the moment CCS globally captures and stores just 40 megatons per annum. I wanted to finally just reflect on the hydrogen opportunity. Today, almost none of the commercially produced hydrogen comes from renewable electricity with electrolysis. It's about 0.3% of the world's production. In fact, the world predominantly delivers hydrogen from fossil fuels, and about 1% of that has carbon capture and storage attached to it, and therefore is low emission. Pardon me. When the Australian government examined what the hydrogen opportunity was globally, it produced this graph. And in 2020, there were 10 exajoules of hydrogen produced globally, with a projection that that will grow globally to 78 exajoules in 2050. That is an enormous volume of hydrogen. And we regularly hear people say that the only hydrogen that will be acceptable is the so-called green hydrogen, produced using electrolyzers and renewable electricity. But we should pause and ask ourselves what that involves. And at a very simple level, to achieve 78 exajoules of hydrogen from renewable electricity requires 26,000 terawatt hours of electricity, roughly equivalent to the total electricity generated from all sources globally in 2018. In other words, we would need to reproduce the world's electricity system just to drive electrolyzers to deliver 78 exajoules of hydrogen. But if we accept that over time we'll move to hydrogen from electrolysis with renewables, but in the meantime, we need to get on with this and do it at the lowest possible cost with proven technology at volume, Then we do it with steam methane reforming and coal gasification, but with CCS, because the costs are a fraction of what they are using electrolyzers with renewables. It is available technology today. Technology is not the challenge here whatsoever. And we can roll out large-scale volume hydrogen to a market that undoubtedly is going to need it to achieve decarbonisation. So I hope that it's clear from all of this and from many of the comments from ministers previously that CCS is clearly vital to achieving net zero emissions. As Dr. Birol said, without it, there's probably very little to no chance of achieving the Paris targets. But to get to there, we've got to increase CCS capacity by more than 100-fold from where it is today by 2050. And to do that, we need much stronger policy to incentivise rapid CCS investment, policy interventions that are long overdue. In our view at the Institute, this is not a technology question. The technology is available and has been available for, in some cases, up to 50 years. The issue is about deployment, and to get deployment, we need to create the right conditions for investment, facilitate the development of CO2 infrastructure, and clarify some key legal and regulatory issues in some jurisdictions. With that, I thank you very much for your time and the invitation, Nishimura-san, to address you today. I wish you well with the balance of the forum, and I reinforce how significant and important it is for the Asian region to urgently invest and adopt CCS. Thank you.